So what we want to look at is the hand of the angels who've been busy in the affairs of the world and looking at Russia, Britain and the Middle East. And yes, the reminder that last time we were looking at the Ukraine and how the Ukraine fitted in with Bible prophecy, how it was the beginnings of the Russian Empire sprang out from Ukraine, and therefore Russia has a very special feeling for Ukraine. That's where the birthplace of the nation took place, and that's where the Greek Orthodox religion became the Russian Orthodox Church. And then we looked at the problem of ISIS, which is still with us. But as I say, tonight we're going to take some broad sweeps, but we know the general picture to which the scriptures, and by way of reading we would have looked at Daniel, but we know these things so well. But we know that Daniel was able to interpret the King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which was of this huge image which stood upon its feet in defiance of the kingdom of God and things of Israel. And its destiny, not directly stated in Daniel chapter 2, but by fitting other passages together, we know its destiny was to stand against the nation of Israel, God's people, in defiance of their God. And it is upon the mountains of Israel that it will be destroyed by the little stone power, and God's kingdom will replace it and spread to the ends of the earth. Now, our interest in Nebuchadnezzar's image is not all the metals that went before, because we know those so well, but it is the feet. And the development of the feet, I believe, belongs to our age and couldn't have happened before our age because of the fact that it belongs to the latter days, and we're living in the latter days. And it needed Israel to come into existence for there a power to arise who will be in opposition to God's people, the nation of Israel. So as we well know, the various metals have gone through their time, and we're in the stage where the iron feet, clay and the toes are in their preparation. And the important thing in Daniel chapter 2 is what Daniel said to the king right at the beginning, that really what you saw, King Nebuchadnezzar, was what God's going to do in the latter days. And so we know that it is only in our day that we see the complete fulfilment of Nebuchadnezzar's image. It's only in our day that it stands upon its feet. And the characteristic of each of these metals was that they bore rule over the land of Israel. They were in opposition normally to the things of Israel, but at least they had control of the land of Israel. And we know that for 1900 years, Israel hasn't been in their land, they have been scattered. And because they have now come back, in 1948, established themselves as a nation in their own land, in God's land, that we can begin to have the rebuilding of the feet, because there is a nation there against which they can direct their hostility. And we can see there's plenty of motivation in the things that are happening in the world today to make them want to come and control Israel and take control of that land and the goods and the spoil that is in that region. But we know that their fate is preordained, as Daniel told the king that in those days of those kings, so it is when all these various elements of the image come together, and many kings banding together, that it's going to be consumed and broken and replaced by the kingdom of God. And brothers and sisters, that's our hope, isn't it, for that day to come, when we can help our Lord Jesus to establish that time of peace and righteousness. Now, obviously, 2 feet have to be attached to 2 legs, and not in isolation, and therefore it gives us a link that in time past, the 2 legs represented the 2 legs of Rome, the east and the western division of the Roman Empire, with Rome at one centre for the Western world and Constantinople as the centre for the Eastern world, and a division running up the Balkans, representing the difference between the Roman and the Greek elements, Byzantine elements of the Roman Empire. On this map it does show Britain as part of the empire, but at 395 that was beginning to shrink. If this map had been just a few years on, 405, something like that, Rome had withdrawn completely from Britain. So the feet are described as part of potter's clay and part of iron, a divided kingdom. And the toes, likewise, part of iron, part of clay, partly strong, partly broken. And it's obviously a very odd mix for a great big heavy image, for very heavy metals at the top, getting heavier and heavier as you go down, to have feet of iron and clay. Indicates that it's not going to last very long. And we know how iron points to Rome, clay points to man. Man was created from the dust of the earth. Rome was very authoritarian. We can see that in the EU institutions and in Russian institutions, very authoritarian. But an element of democracy, people power, mingled together. But especially the iron points to a religious element, because that is what runs through the core of this, the religious element of these different metals. And it is the churches which are beginning to play a more important role in the West, but especially in the East. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia, plays a very strong role in the running of the country. Politicians and religious leaders work hand in hand. And we believe that a similar situation has to arise in the West, that the church has got to get more involved in the affairs of men. And I believe that under the present Pope, he is the ideal champion to move forward this integration of church and state. We did look in the Bible class last year, I think it was, at Daniel chapter 4, and the dream which Nebuchadnezzar had of this great tree under which all the nations were dwelling, and there was the decree from the watchers to hew it down and chop it down, and it was to be banded with iron and brass for a period of 7 times. And we're told how those 7 times would pass over him. It changes from talking about a tree to being very personal and talking about him. And this is a matter which is by the decree of the holy ones. And it's obviously very important that there are these bands that hold the tree together. Unfortunately, that shows 2 separate bands. When one reads closely Daniel chapter 4, I must admit I hadn't appreciated it before, but it is a band of brass and iron. But not being an artist, I couldn't change it. So just mentally bring those together, and it is one band consisting of 2 metals. And we know that what was pointed to here was the preservation of this tree in order that it might reflourish. And I believe that has been the role of the iron, the Roman Catholic and the Greek brass elements. These churches have kept alive the spirit of Babylon, which is so much against God's people, Israel, and against God himself. And we know that that dream was more than just a 7-year period of madness for Nebuchadnezzar. This is, after all, Daniel the prophet, and we know how his prophecies have long-term aims. And so we have to take, and this is what we looked at in the Bible class, that if we put that into days, 7 years of 360 days, we've got 2,520 days. Apply that as a day for a year principle. If we apply it from the fall of Babylon, which is what this is all about, the tree being cut down, Brother Thomas states that in 539, so if we add 252 to BC 539 and take off the 0, as it were, we get to about 1982. More conventional dating would be that Babylon fell in 542. No, that's Brother Thomason. The conventional is 539. But it matters not. It's the same kind of time period. And go on, that time period from the fall of Babylon, we come to the time of John Paul II. He became Pope in 1978. He went to Poland for the first time in 79. And we know what a beginning of a big movement that resulted in. Solidarity was set up in 1980. Ratzinger became the prefect of the Congregation of Faith, and nobody knew at that stage that he would eventually become a pope. And then he went back to Poland in 1982, and that was really the beginning of the decline in the Soviet Empire. Under this influence that was coming from Poland and the other countries there, this brought about a great change in the Soviet Union. So that in 1991 it fell. So it's an interesting period, and I've just put that up there, not Brother Whitaker, but just to indicate how unlikely people living back in those times, that's in 1973, the thought there could ever be a religious revival in the world, let alone in Russia, but in Europe, was just something one couldn't see from the situation that was happening. So, but we know the great change that has taken place, and it is quite a sobering lesson. And so when we look at the world today, we see the great conflict in the states of Europe. As different countries are being pulled and pushed, we recognise this is the work of the angels behind the scenes, moving them into the correct foot. And countries, one would assume that if that ancient division line were extended northward, which seems quite a reasonable proposition, then countries like Ukraine, Romania and Bulgaria, Greece, Cyprus and Turkey all belong to the eastern leg, the Russian leg, rather than trying to associate themselves with the western leg. So we can see why there is such conflict in those regions. And Russia is very much wanting to reclaim that former territory of the Ukraine and Romania, Bulgaria, and of course there is the connection with Greece from the Orthodox religion. So there is a pull, and as I say, in wonderful ways, we're seeing this parting of the nations, as it were, the realignments necessary for the 2 feet to form. And so I would expect from Scripture that the map will end up something looking a bit like that. It's quite clear that the EU has advanced too far eastward while Russia, the Soviet, was weak and Russia was weak, recovering. Now there has to be the adjustment and the pushing back, and so we have a meeting point. And it's interesting that countries like Bulgaria and Romania still maintain strong links to Russia. They were part of the Soviet Empire. And we know that Turkey is eventually to fall to Russia because Russia has to be in control of Constantinople. So we have this interesting thought that religion is the binding power, the iron and the brass, that is holding things together. And there's an interesting quote from Forbes, which is not a religious paper or anything like that, but this observation: among the geopolitical confrontation between Putin's Russia and the US and its allies, little attention has been paid to the role played by religion, either as a shaper of Russian domestic politics or as a means of understanding Putin's international actions. The role of religion has long tended to get short shrift in the study of statecraft. Yet nowhere has it played a more prominent role, and perhaps nowhere has its importance been more unrecognised than in its role in supporting the Russian state and Russia's current place in world affairs. In other words, it's saying that religion plays a big part in the thinking, the psyche of Russia and the kind of things that she is doing, very much influenced by her past history and the Orthodox religion. And at the end of last year, when Putin made his end-of-the-year speech, he again made reference to religion as his excuse, as it were, for going in and seizing Crimea. Christianity was a powerful spiritual unifying force that helped involve various tribes and tribal unions of the vast Eastern Slavic world in the creation of a Russian nation and a Russian state. It was thanks to this spiritual unity that our forefathers, for the first time and forevermore, saw themselves as a united nation. All of this allows us to say that Crimea and Sevastopol have invaluable civilizational and even sacred importance for Russia, like the Temple Mount in Jerusalem for the followers of Islam and Judaism. So he's saying, Crimea to us is as important as the site of the temple is to the Jews, or the Dome of the Rock to Islam. So that was quite an interesting insight into his thinking. Now, we've seen the advancement of Russia back in 2008 into Georgia, to enclaves there, and that work is still going on. Only just about a month ago, there was just a little piece in the Telegraph saying how they had moved the marker stones and were enlarging the area that the Russians had control of, and there was still an ongoing creep, as it were, of Russian forces in Georgia to take more and more territory. And then last year we saw the taking of Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. At the same time, there was a movement of Russian troops into a slither of land which forms part of Moldova, Transylvania. And this past year, he has very much strengthened the port in Sevastopol, moving ships, military equipment, nuclear bombers, all sorts of equipment onto Crimea to make that a forward base. We also saw at the beginning of the year his agreement with Cyprus that the Russian ships could use the port facilities in Cyprus. And then just for the past 3 weeks, if that, we've seen his move into Syria. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail. So Russia is very active. She is also cooperates with Iran and has been with President Assad in Syria for many years. And so we can see stepping stones on her way down eventually to come and take Jerusalem. Russia is divided up into various 5, military zones, and starting on Monday of this week, there was a huge military movement. It's an annual thing that they have, military exercise, but so this involved 95,000 Russian troops alongside forces from the various Soviet states, with tongue-twisting names, which I won't attempt. The war games include 170 fighter jets, 20 warships, and it spans a huge area and runs on September the 20th. So all the while, Russia is exercising her troops, making sure they're up to speed. But what is so interesting is his move into Syria. As I say, just been ongoing the past 3 weeks. If we just hone out a bit, Tartus is where their existing port facilities are. It's about 80 kilometres to the south, about 50 miles to the south of Vatican, where the present bases are being built. If we just go up there, that is, Antakya is the old Antioch, And Antioch was originally built by the Seleucids in the time of the Greek Empire as their western headquarters. And from Antioch was ruled this part, and from Seleucus, just near Babylon, was ruled the eastern part of the Seleucid part of the Greek Empire. And it is, at the moment, is in Turkey. Aleppo is the main city of the region, as Damascus is down in the south. Now, Assad's hometown and the area where the Alawites come from are these hills just to the southeast of Latakia, and Assad's hometown is there. So one can see that Russia has chosen this port area. Is a very good port. It goes way back to BC times as a port. It's the nearest spot to Cyprus across here. And if we just put it up there, as well as using the port facilities there, they have taken over this airfield just to the south of Latakia and have been very busy increasing the size of the runways, putting up prefabricated buildings to house thousands of troops, put in air control, a portable air control station complete with anti-jamming mechanisms and that. And there has been a constant stream of weaponry and troops into this region. In Debka last Friday, it gave this map. The biggest nuclear submarine in the world, which is armed with 20 ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, bearing up to 200 nuclear warheads, is due to arrive today at the port at Latakia. The Russians wanted to overfly Bulgaria and Greece and Turkey in their supplying of troops there, but America put pressure on Bulgaria and Greece and they said no. Turkey hasn't even replied. So they've had to assemble the troops over here and fly them over the Caspian, across the top of Iran into Iraq and into Syria that way. And these planes are coming into Damascus, where there is a very big air runway and a military base for the big bombers. And down through the Bosphorus and around this way, a steady stream of ships with weaponry on them. Satellite pictures show the weaponry on the decks, hardly covered, disguised. It is very clear that Putin has decided the time has come to make an advanced base in the same way that he has in Crimea, to put a base into Syria. The reason, let's just put the next one on. These are just some of the weaponry that is being taken there. The interesting thing is that the soldiers that are being put in there are from an elite troop, the Marine Brigade, which is based at Sevastopol, and is one of the few units of the Black Sea Fleet known to have played an active role in Russia's military takeover of the Ukrainian peninsula 18 months ago. So they've been hardened in how to take over enemy territory, as it were. And so it says it's an intriguing choice that Russia has made, because it spent vast sums of money building up these troops in Crimea, and now it has moved them to this new zone outside Europe, one that gives the lie that sanctions and diplomatic isolation have forced the Kremlin into compromise. Rather, Russia appears ready and willing to take on multiple wars at once. So crack troops are being put in there. What Putin wants to do is to retain President Assad in power. That has been his aim all along. And why is he so interested in keeping Assad in power? is the simple reason that if Assad fell, then the kind of elements that would take over would be from the so-called rebels who are fighting against Assad. And they wouldn't be sympathetic to Russia at all, because there are a lot of soldiers fighting among the rebels who come from Chechnya and the Caucasus area, who are Muslims, who are opposed to Putin, have caused a lot of trouble at home. And what Putin is afraid of is if they gain the upper hand, then from the spoils of war they would have a lot of wealth, and they would then go home and then concentrate on fighting with Russia. So, according to Dedgar, Putin has given orders to his Marines that if you come across Chechens or South Caucasians, just eliminate them. So he is wanting to keep Assad in power. It's also very interesting that it was under Assad, before all the trouble started, that the Christians had their relative safety. Assad belonged to the Alawites, which was a minority tribe, but he had power because of the influence of this tribe. And as a minority, he was more disposed to treat the Christians, who were a minority, well. And in spite of Syria being a Sunni Muslim country, the Christians flourished. It is because of all the fighting, and because Assad isn't in control, that we're seeing all these pictures of fugitives fleeing not only into Lebanon, but up into Jordan, Iraq, and now this year have been making their way across into Europe. And so part of his reasoning is, I want to go in and establish stability in this region in order to stop this exodus of the Christians. It makes much more sense to deal with the matter at the source, is his reasoning, and there is an element of truth in that. I expect we shall see that Syria will be carved up. I think we're going to see completely new realignments in the Middle East, because the original alignments which were put in place at the end of the First World War were very arbitrary. They didn't take into account religious feelings. And what this Arab Spring has released is not a time of peace and stability, but a breakup among different tribal units. And I think that probably Assad will end up with part of Syria, ISIS will end up with a part of Syria, Iran will end up with a part of Syria. And I think there will be quite big changes. So what is interesting is that is as it were, leapt over Turkey. But if you were a statistician, it would make great sense to also establish a presence in Greece. Then you would have your potential enemy of Turkey surrounded to the north, to the east, to the south, and to the west. And we know how the Russians have always wanted to retake Constantinople, to purge themselves of that great shame when it was lost to the infidel. Now, we know the situation in Greece is very dire. The elections at the beginning of the year brought Tsipras into power, and he has managed to steer a course which hasn't made him very popular, because the very thing that he was elected to do, to refuse to knuckle down to the German demands, he has been forced to do. And the only way that Greece is going to survive economically with support from the West is for them to take extreme austerity measures. And because this is the only way forward, he did resign and there are elections on 20th of September. So on Sunday there will be elections, and it is thought that his party will lose power and probably will get a very messy situation in Greece. Even if there was a party that came to power and said, yes, we will fall in with the demands of the IMF and the EU, Greece probably wouldn't last very long. The situation is so dire. Its GDP, which is the income of the country, has shrunk by 25% since 2010. Nearly 26% of the workforce are unemployed, most of whom do not receive benefits. Wages are down 38%, pensions by 45%. Some 18% of the population cannot meet their food needs, and 32% live below the poverty line. Since most of the bailout funds have gone to pay off the country's loans, almost nothing has been invested in economic recovery. And above all, Greece's debt mountain is now almost twice the country's annual economic output, 180% of GDP. In other words, if all the money that Greece generated in a year, it won't be enough to pay off the debts, the annual repayments on the debts. They're just in a hopeless position. The only way is to leave the EU to default on their debts and reimpose the drachma at a much more advantageous rate of exchange. So it is almost a certainty that Greece will be forced out of the euro and presumably forced out of the EU, which is what we would expect, because it doesn't belong, it's an Orthodox country, it's not a Roman Catholic country, it doesn't belong to the West, it belongs to the East. And waiting in the wings is Putin, who will be prepared to put the money in to pick up the pieces to pull Greece towards Russia. So, it is very interesting, as we, could well be that Russia gets very heavily involved in the next 18 months or so. And then Turkey would be absolutely surrounded. Now, normally at this stage I would have talked about the Turk Stream, which is the pipeline which Russia was going to put into Bulgaria and on into Europe to supply gas. But because of all the problems that the EU made about Gazprom being a supplier and a pipeline operator, and they said you can't do both jobs, Putin decided at the end of the year that he wouldn't send it into Europe, he would send it into Turkey, into this region of Turkey, which is very industrialised there, and also extend it on to Greece, so that when Greece got into trouble, there'll be a source of supply of gas there. But at the moment, everything is on hold. The Blue Stream is an existing pipeline, but again, he was going to upgrade it and push more gas through to Ankara. But at the moment, there is trouble in Turkey. The elections in June went very badly wrong for the former Prime Minister Erdogan, and there is a hung parliament, and so they're going to have fresh elections in November. So until there is a government there that can make arrangements, nothing is happening. And it seems as if Putin has seized this opportunity while Turkey is preoccupied with its own internal politics to make this jump into Syria. These are cartoons that you've probably seen in Christopher. We know that that was the step he has made. He wanted Crimea, he has moved into Crimea. His next stage is to move forward into Turkey and to take Turkey on his way south to the Holy Land and down into Egypt, with opposition from the southern states. So I just now want to just go and have a very brief look at Britain. As you can see, they don't always see eye to eye. And Cameron has told her bluntly that I could walk away from the EU, and she has told him we all hate and isolate you. So, not a very good rapport between the two. And this is so characteristic of Britain and the EU. Now, one of the interesting outcomes of the Labour elections on Sunday is that, Jeremy Corbyn is far less enthusiastic for the things of Europe than his defeated rivals. So maybe one can see the angelic hand that Labour are going to become, as far as this country is, it would appear, a party of not much influence, which will allow Cameron to proceed with what he wants to do. But interestingly, with such a leader, Cameron, who's got such a small majority in Parliament, may be helped and supported. Interesting to see how things work out. So there is planned the referendum probably next year by 2017 at the latest. Now the question on the referendum was going to be, should Britain remain a member of the European Union? Tick or put your cross, yes or no. But the Electoral Commission had a look at this and they decided that that was biased, because people are far more likely to say yes than no, because, well, we like to say yes, don't we? We can. And so it has been changed. It's going through Parliament at the moment, but the government is supporting this change. So the wording will be, should Britain leave the European Union, and you put your cross against leave or stay, which they feel is a much more balanced thing. Now, one of the interesting things is, one of the elements that can influence the voting for this are the Commonwealth member people who live in Britain. Many of them have become naturalised. We know what a problem when Britain joined the EEC, wasn't it, in those days? Because of high tariffs, food couldn't come from the Commonwealth countries, and there was a great upset among the Commonwealth people that Britain had turned her back on them, and indeed she had, and we have suffered for that. But Commonwealth people will be very glad for Britain to get out of the EU and go back to supporting the Commonwealth. And Cameron, on his last tour last week, when he was in Asia, said, Britain, this is what we've got to do. We've got to build up our trade with the Commonwealth and other world countries. So the people from the Commonwealth represent about 6% of the population, which in a close vote could be quite an important element that pushes to a leave situation. Obviously, we leave this in the hands of the angels. It's so exciting to see that what we've talked about for a long time, becoming almost a reality before our eyes. And the other thing, of course, which isn't helping at the moment, is the flood of migrants to this country. And for the first time in the opinion polls, the one at the beginning of September, for the first time had a majority of people saying they wanted to leave. It was very narrow, it was 51% to 49%, but that's the first time more people in the polls have said they want to leave. And I think this possibility, this mass migration of people into this country has caused a lot of people to think, hey, should we be in the EU and have to do all the things that the EU wants to do? Wouldn't we be much better to control our own borders? Again, perhaps the hand of the angels are using these things to influence the population of this country. Right, I'll just go back to the Middle East. In the end of Daniel chapter 11, when it tells about the king of the north coming down, one of the elements is that the king of the north wants the land of Egypt and talks about having power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. So there's gold mentioned and precious things. Well, we talked about the gold in the past. Egypt has had a gold mining for about 3,000 years. And in 1995, they started reopening a gold mine, and the Ferro Gold Company was taken over by Centamin, an Australian company, in I think that was in 95. I think I put my date down. But they've been mining since 1992, and it was in 95 that Centamin took over, and they have greatly enlarged the mine. I don't know whether you can see, but you can just see this little yellow there. That is the gold that they are trying to dig out. So vast amounts of rock have to be moved to get at these very thin veins of gold. But they're estimated that there are 13 million ounces of gold here. Now, gold prices have been dropping, rather strangely, but they have. It's now about £700 an ounce. So if you multiply 13 million by 700, it's a big sum of money. Obviously, you've got the cost of getting it out, but it is quite profitable. So gold is something that Russia really desires. A lot of her money has been invested in gold bullion, and she has been buying up gold all around the world. So you can see what an attraction it will be to take over a country which has its own gold mines. So gold, yes. Precious things. Well, obviously from century to century what is termed precious varies, doesn't it? Today, what is accounted precious is energy, isn't it? Gas and oil. You're probably all aware that just last month, a vast gas discovery was made by an Italian firm just 120 miles off the coast, and it is described as so big that it is even bigger than the Israel's Leviathan field. So suddenly for Egypt, here is a source of potential wealth. She has a desperate need for energy. She has a very large population, growing population. Her population's 10 times that of Israel. So whereas Israel can look at Leviathan and say, well, we only want a small part of it, and the rest we can export, as far as the hugeness of this source is concerned, it is thought that it will nearly all be used by the Egyptian market itself. Because this did raise some consternation among the Israelis, because the Israeli government has been dragging its heels and hasn't given permission until just very recently for the Leviathan site to be developed. Because they were worried, there was voices in Israel saying that the government won't be making as much money out of it as they could. We're selling it too cheaply, as it were. Well, when Netanyahu came back into power, and that wasn't until May time, this was one of the things that he pressurised his government. Look, we've got to get moving on Leviathan, and they came to an agreement with the owners on prices. But one of the things was they were going to sell that gas, and gas from Tamar, to the Egyptians, because the Egyptians were so short of gas. And so what is being discussed at the moment is, well, are the Egyptians going to want our Israeli gas after all? Have we really moved and left it too late? Well, the general feeling is that the demand in Egypt is so great that Egypt will still want Israeli gas. She has long-term contracts to export gas. Years ago, she was a gas exporter. And she hasn't been able to fulfill her contracts because they've needed the gas at home. So the concept is, and the concept was originally, that the gas that Israel supplied to Egypt would be then sold onwards to other nations. Seems all a bit mad, but that was the idea. So the elections in Israel took place on March the 17th. It wasn't until May the 6th that they actually managed to form a government. It's always very difficult with all the different factions. There's 120 seats to be distributed, and in order to get a majority, no one party is ever big enough, so you have to make coalitions. And against all the odds, just exactly as with the British elections, Conservatives have been written off, but they gained seats. So in Israel, Likud, which I think had about 24, 26 seats, was thought would go down to 20 seats, actually got 30 seats. And so he was able to, with great difficulty, form a coalition by bringing together the religious parties. So as you go down this side, they become more and more extremist. So Jewish Home gave him 8 seats. Shash gave him another 7. They're Orthodox. United Torah another 6. And then he made an alliance with the centre-right party, Kalanu. And that then gave him his 61 seats. So exactly like Cameron, he's just got a wafer-thin majority. But what is so interesting to us as Bible students is the makeup of those parties that have come together. And they're all against handing over territory to the Palestinians. His own party says, well, we can't have Palestinian states, there is nobody we can deal with. That's too divided. The Kalanu have a very hard line on security issues, so they're not going to give away territory to Palestinians. The Jewish Home just totally opposed to any Palestinian state. Shash, a bit like Likud, well, there's nobody we can negotiate with, so there's no possibility on the horizon of there being a Palestinian state. Of course, the United Torah, very extreme party, the land was given by God to the Jews, so we're not going to give it away. So that has given us, for the first time, a religious leaning government. And we've seen over the years the transition of the state of Israel from being a secular state to being more and more religious. As we get closer and closer to the coming of the Messiah, there are the right elements coming forward. But there is, you can see there is an element who will be willing and ready to submit to the Messiah in their time of trouble. So, although Obama has been pushing for a Palestinian state, although the Pope has been pushing for a Palestinian state, there really isn't any expectation that that will succeed. And interestingly, the Pope, when he went and visited Israel last year, he was very much sided with the Palestinians, and that feeling has continued. This is back in May time, saying how Pope Francis is a man on a mission, but what is his mission exactly? The rhetoric and body language, the gracious gestures, the incessant smiles and compliments give the impression of a selfless leader determined to broker peace, cooperation and tranquility. In Cuba, Israel, and all over this chaotic, disunited planet. But consider the decisions and the actions. In both Cuba and Israel, the Vatican is creating tension, disunity and instability that are likely to lead to conflict and war. Yesterday, this is back in May time, the Vatican revealed that it had formally recognised the state of Palestine and a newly finalised treaty with the Palestinians. The treaty defines the Catholic Church's activities in areas controlled by the Palestinians and will be signed by both sides when Mahmoud Abbas visits the Vatican. Critics of Israel and patrons of Palestinian statehood are elated. The movement to recognise the Palestinian state has gained momentum in recent years, recently within the United Nations. An endorsement from the Pope and the Vatican is huge. Time will tell, but gaining the support of the most respected and admired leader on earth could be just what is needed to get the project of Palestinian statehood over the finish line. Well, I don't believe that will happen, but for the Jewish state and its declining number of supporters, the Vatican's decision was an enormous blow. And what was also very interesting was, much later in July, the Vatican is still refusing to let the Israelis know what the Palestinians have signed up to, which makes the Israelis very suspicious. Why is the Vatican so secretive about what they've signed up to? But the Vatican has rejected requests by Israeli diplomats to obtain the text of the accord signed between the Vatican and Palestine 2 weeks ago. The diplomatics have tried 4 occasions, but the Vatican's not playing ball. And when Abbas went and visited the Pope in May, remember the furore, because the papers reported that the Pope had said to him, "You are an angel of peace." Now, in fairness to the Pope, he didn't say that, it was a mistranslation. He did say, and you'll see it in the Latin text, "You could be an angel of peace," which has quite a different meaning. But what was so interesting, fascinating, was the final words that Abbas spoke to the Pope. "We will always be together because our mission is the same." Now we know what Abbas's mission is. It's get rid of the Jews. And there he was openly saying to the Pope, well, you know, we're working on the same wavelength. And the Pope just merely replied, "Pray for me." Yeah, we know what Abbas wants. If he does get a Palestinian state, it will be Jew-free. No Jews will be allowed to live there. Arabs can live in Israel, but Jews will not be allowed to be on the West Bank. And that, in his plan, is just the first step to making the whole area Jew-free. But we know from scriptures that this area, the highlands, the mountains of Israel, is where Israel is found to be dwelling when Gog invades. So that will very strongly indicate that unless they have to give up land to retake it again before Gog comes, unless that's the scenario, it would seem to indicate that there isn't going to be a Palestinian state. That they're so disunited, fighting among themselves. What is also interesting, and we mentioned this before, is on the West Bank are these settlements and the little dots there, red dots. This is where many of the religious people live, very simple lives, studying Torah, teaching it to their children, so that in the strongest of the groups, by the age of 15, children can recite the whole of the Old Testament off by heart. Puts us to shame. But it would seem that the angels are preparing a people here who will be responsive when Christ comes. And so, brothers and sisters, time has more than gone. What we have to recognise is that time is short. We know Gog has to come down and invade the land. But as I say every time, we know that that lies way after the Lord Jesus has come. The first event, as far as we're concerned, is the return of the Master and the judgment seat. And the larger work will take place, bringing about a reformation. And then finally, because of what is happening in Israel, it will be the last straw to the nations. They will come down to destroy Israel from being a nation, as the other metals have done in their day and generation. And so what we have to recognise is that one day we've got to walk away from everything. Our lives are going to come to a total end, and all our possessions are just going to be of no value in that day. Even our families and our brothers and sisters and all our possessions are just going to be taken away, and we will go to the judgment seat just with what we've got in our minds, because that is what we're judged on, isn't it? How much we have let our minds absorb the Word of God. And we're responsible for what goes in as we are responsible for what comes out. And so it behoves us to look carefully at our lives and ensure as best we can. It's an easy matter, I know. But the signs are so abounding that our Master is at hand that we must make every effort to try and be ready for that day when he comes. Thank you.